the way many things go, some of us leave before actually 4 o'clock, and some of us are afraid about getting our car or want to get in front of the line of somebody else, etc., etc. So I do want to take this moment of saying thank you to every one of you. I mentioned to a colleague a little earlier, looking around the room, it is really, to me, fascinating that so many of you professionals, you have what to do with your time, you have what to do with your clients and patients and friends and people that we deal with and family obligations, etc. To take off for an entire day, I know it is very, very difficult. So I want to thank you for being here and making this seminar a tremendous, tremendous success. When something is successful, it will encourage us to do it again, with government funding or without government funding. If the need is there, we will, please God, do our obligations. We do also have for parents, and designed particularly for mothers, I believe it's 2 weeks, the date, Dina? June 5th. And that will be taking place, I believe, in Beis Rivka, Campus Chomish on 470 Lefferts, from 9:30 to 1:30 that day. So if you know any, we'll announce it again. We'll keep it a favor. Okay, and once again, I want to take the certificates for the CEUs are on the back. For an extra $10, we can sell you an extra. No. We can give you a certificate, please. It is an honor system. So you'll take one and you'll put your name in, if you know how to spell your name, and it'll bring you the success that you need. If any other announcements have to be made, at 4 o'clock we'll be starting our next group of our announcements. Once again, thank you for being here. Thank Michal Berman. Thank you, Dina Gorkin. Thank you, Yanka Berman. And, of course, thank you, Dr. Ron. You did a wonderful job. In my opinion, within our community, meaning the Jewish community and couples that I see, I find anger management, dealing with anger, to be perhaps the #1 problem. We all, well, I shouldn't say we, you all get angry at times. And this is terrible that you do so. And once and for all, we're going to take care of it. We will give you the tools how to deal with anger. Somehow, some of us can think we are abusive, not abusive. Some of us are addicted, we're not addicted. But we all, unfortunately, get angry. I know it's our kid's fault, and it's our spouse's fault, and it's our co-worker's fault. We never do anything wrong. But just imagine if we were able to be above that, and even when they make those big mistakes, we can remain calm. Without further ado, the doctor, it's all yours.
Oh, okay. I guess the framework is this. We're going to be I'll be talking at you till 3:30, about 50 minutes from now, and then we'll have half an hour for questions and answers. One of the questions I was being asked over this break was kind of give me some specific tools for shame. I have a few, but I really want to emphasize that it's not about tools. With shame, it's about me and you and our relationship. So I have not found very many tools or very good tools for dealing with shame. It's much more personal. Now, when I get to anger in a few minutes, I've got a lot of tools for anger, because that's an externalizing problem, whereas shame is the internalizing one. But my emphasis with shame is this is you and this is me, and we're in this room together. And how can we do this with a maximum of respect and caring? So, if you'll turn to page 10, I do have a little material on addiction that I was asked to develop, and I'm not going to spend much time on it. First the man takes a drink, then the drink takes the man, is one of the sayings in AA. First the man takes a drink, and then the drink takes the man. Addiction goes from a want to a need, and from a state of freedom to a state of entrapment. Those are three of the things that when I think of what is all practical measures, what is an addiction, that's what an addiction is. I very much like Craig Knacken's definition on page 10. An addiction is a pathological love and trust relationship with an object or event. So that includes gambling, that includes drugs, that includes sexual addiction, computer addiction. The idea is that the addict comes to love and trust that process more than any relationship with a human being. And Knacken, if you haven't read that, it's a little book out of Hazelden called The Addictive Personality. It's quite good. One of the things he talks about in that book is that the personality doesn't create the addiction creates the personality. So as people become more and more addicted to a substance or to an event, their personalities does indeed change, because what they're doing is becoming more and more involved in their addictive process. And so the person who had been a wonderful father now becomes negligent. The mom who had been so solicitous and caring becomes abusive, and the whole issue is protecting your supply and honoring your addiction. Yes.
I'm sorry, isn't addiction people more predisposed because
Well, the research is so poor on this right now, or so complicated would be better. I'm sure, we can eliminate the extremes. One is that there is no neurological connection or behavioral connection, genetic connection, because that's certainly not true. The likelihood of a son of an alcoholic becoming alcoholic is at least triple that of a non-alcoholic. On the other hand, we can also eliminate that it's only neurological and biochemical. It's a matter of each of us have a genetic predisposition that makes us more or less vulnerable to addictive processes, and then we live in a world that either supports our becoming addicted or supports us not being addicted. So it's nature and nurture together always. All right. I included on page 10 the DSM-4 diagnostic criteria for substance abuse. I don't think we need to go over those together. You can just read those. If you had any questions, you're welcome to do it. Oh, I see my emails on these handouts. Good. Any of you who want to contact me afterwards and have a dialogue about anything we're talking about, please feel free. I get a lot of emails from people when I've gone to conferences, and I enjoy it. It's really fun to talk with people. Sometimes they talk about their personal situation. Sometimes they want a little help with a client. Sometimes they just want to talk about theory. I don't care, but write me a note. I'll be happy to answer it. And then on page 11, and this is the one I might be most helpful. I believe that life is very complicated and that there are no simple answers to anything. And one of the things that there's no simple answers for is, why does a kid use? Why does a teenager use? My first job was at an adolescent chemical dependency counseling inpatient center. Back in those days, the kids were there for 5 weeks. Now they'd be there for 5 days, probably, and then off to an aftercare program or something. But one of the things that I had to learn real fast was that any generalization is dangerous and will be used against you at some point or another. That we just can't generalize about what makes people addicted. So there's about a dozen possibilities here. Some people use drugs and alcohol or gambling or whatever to feel pleasure, or to increase bodily sensations, including sexuality. And on the other side, where I say a typical substance or experience, don't take that too seriously. There's often people will take ecstasy or cocaine or mushrooms for that, but any drug could be used for any of these purposes, even if it seems absolutely contradictory. It's just that some drugs are more associated with some purposes. To fit in or belong, marijuana is a very good one for that, because to really get high from marijuana, you really have to, and when you're first learning it, some of the early studies on marijuana said that you don't really get high on marijuana unless other people are going, ooh, wow, yeah, isn't it? Am I supposed to feel like that? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, is it good? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I am in a recovery program myself, and marijuana was my drug of choice. And I remember the first time I smoked, and there was these 3D images, and my choice was either going, ooh, is that great, or I'm going to be sick. And they said it's great, so I said, okay, it's great. And went on to a nice career along those lines. Okay. But good things end, and fortunately in my case, because it turned out to be, sometimes what you think is a path in life turns out to be a dead end. And it took me a while to realize that. Okay, to get away from adults, or just to get away. I see this, especially if there's a lot of conflict in the family. If being home is just a miserable, awful place to be, and the kid will go upstairs and get stoned. They just get away from the family physically, or they stay away. I got this one family I'm working with, and the kid just stays away. And what does he do? He goes to places where people say that's okay. To feel intense sensations. If you're familiar with the breakdown in drugs, to put it simply, there's uppers, there's downers, and there's mind benders. Some people use drugs to get high. Some people use drugs to get down. And some people use drugs to get really screwed up. And to have fantasy experiences. So, up, down, and fantasy is what it amounts to. To feel intense sensations, that's the uppers. And and again, maybe you're familiar that, for instance, the more you use cocaine, it works. One of the biggest problems with addictions is they work awfully well. And the more you use cocaine, the more your brain is flooded with dopamine. Dopamine makes you feel wonderful. So only one problem with it: when your brain's flooded with dopamine, your brain quits making dopamine. So then you have to have more cocaine. And finally your brain quits making dopamine completely, and you go to a treatment center, and you quit doing cocaine, and you go into the world's worst depression, and it lasts 9 months. And 6 to 9 months, and you can't imagine why life is worth living until your brain finally learns how once again to make cocaine, or make dopamine. That wasn't my drug of choice, believe me. All right. To be free from normal restraints. The classic, I just want to use alcohol to loosen up a little bit. And then a little bit more and a little bit more. To feel powerful or strong. Literally physically strong, like anabolic steroids, but emotionally strong as well. To compensate for feelings of emptiness. And to escape physical or emotional distress. Those would be and even to go numb would be the drugs that help people feel nothing at all. Heroin, just to feel just a state of bliss. Some people call it bliss, but it's not exactly blissful. It's just I don't have to feel any pain. It's a sad life when the best you can imagine is to not have any pain. I used to quote a Paul Simon line: "A good day is a day without pain." It turned out it's a good day is a day without rain, but I liked it better when I said it wrong for 10 years before anybody corrected me. I guess nobody listens to Paul Simon anymore. All right. And then finally, to something new. And that's where the kids that I shudder the most at are the ones who use drugs to try something new. A kid for instance, a couple weeks ago that I talked to, and I said, well, what did you get high on? And he said, well, methamphetamine and alcohol, and some little green pills. I said, little green pills? He said, yeah. And I said, well, what was in the little green pills? He said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Yeah, but I'm an adult. Back to risk-taking. So I don't know and I don't care. What did it do? I don't know. How can you separate those drugs? I had one guy, he had the misfortune of withdrawing from 5 different drugs at the same time. Yeah. He stabbed the cop right in the chest. The cop had body armor on, or he'd be dead. Okay. But note at the bottom of that page, all these are starter reasons. Addictions are like mountains. They create their own weather. And once you start getting addicted, the addiction becomes the reason for the addiction. Yeah. It's self-perpetuating and self-fulfilling. And you have to remember that. So, it can be, you don't want to waste a whole lot of time on why, or even what's the reasons. You got to stop the addiction. You got to stop the process first, and then you have the leisure to work on the whys. The whys are important, but getting the person to stop so that the pattern quits playing out is really critical. Okay. I think I just want to mention on the next page, on page 12, why adolescents try drugs. My PowerPoint here. Everybody has a different reason. So be curious, ask, listen. Don't make any assumptions. Expect that there may be more than one reason. People have many reasons. Addictions are often like a river with many tributaries. To look for the one tributary, it can be magical thinking. Every addiction is supported by multiple reinforcements. And sometimes there's no reasons at all. Like I said, the addiction becomes its own reason for being. Okay, and then 2 theories of intervention. I just want to mention, in case you aren't familiar with that, the traditional intervention model, of course, is AA and abstinence. And the model is, you've got a disease. It's not a moral problem. There's a moral model which says that addictions are morally bad. But then, if you get past that, then you have the AA type model, which says that you have to abstain because it's a disease, and there's no half, as they say in AA, half measures avail us nothing. We have to do the whole thing. And then there's what's called the harm reduction model, and with harm reduction, it's sort of the goal isn't to stop somebody from using. The goal is to stop them from killing themselves or somebody else while they're using, to lessen the amount of harm that is going on. And for adolescents, when we're talking about adolescents, the program that I was in, my first job as a professional, was an AA model, total abstinence model. And for some kids it works. For most kids, of course, what they say something like this: "You're telling me that I can never have another drug in my life? I can never have another drink, ever? Are you out of your blank mind?" And they look at you like you just got off the turnip truck or something. That they can't believe you're so naive as to do that. So my own personal bias is that harm reduction is where I start with adolescents. But I always ask, if this doesn't work, what's your bottom line? At what point would you say I've got to quit using entirely? And it doesn't make any difference what my bottom line is. It doesn't make any difference what the school's bottom line is, what the parents' bottom line is. It's what the client's bottom line is, what the teenager's bottom line is. And they have bottom lines. And sometimes they will honor them in terms of, the bottom line is, when somebody comes in and says, I never thought I would do that, and I did. And I've got to change. I can't stand myself. And that's sometimes where there's some good shame, by the way. So, a kid I was working with, a young woman I was working with, and she was using a lot of drugs, and she just started to puke her brains out. She was just vomiting and vomiting. I hope I'm not offending, but vomiting. And in the middle of that, she looked up and saw herself in the mirror, just covered with that. And she came to me the next day and she said, "That's it. I can't do this anymore." So sometimes shame is a good thing to have. Okay. I want to skip on to anger. And I think we should go to page 15. Goals with angry adolescents. There are 3 basic goals, and these do not apply just to adolescents. They apply to people in general. And this is on page 15 as well. The first goal is prevention. Help somebody not get angry in the first place. The second goal is containment. If you do get angry, don't have a meltdown. And the third goal is resolution, which is let's solve the problem so you don't have it again. I used to, I got this wrong for a long time. I used to think I'm pretty good at calming people down. And I would have a kid come into my office and he'd be yelling and screaming, "It's not fair, it's just not fair." The classic adolescent moral argument. They can't tell you why it's not fair. In terms of moral training, by the way, try this one of these days. Next time somebody's saying a kid is saying it's not fair, it's just not fair, ask them, what basic moral principle has been violated? They will look at you like you were from another planet. What do you mean, what moral principle has been violated? But then you explain what a moral principle is. If you say it's not fair, something very important some very important moral principle is being broken here. Can you tell me what it is? And if it really is important, they will tell you. If it's not very important, if it's just they're saying it's not fair, but it's trivial, really, then they'll begin to let it go. Okay, so I used to think if I could calm a kid down, I'd be okay. And I got really good at it. And they would leave and they say, "Thank you, Ron." And they'd come back the next week and they'd have the same problem and be just as angry as they were in the first place. So what I learned is it's not just enough to be calm. What you have to do is to help the person change things. And I don't think I mentioned it yet, but I believe that there are two very important positive uses of anger. You cannot approach anger unless you know the positive uses of anger. And the two most important positive uses of anger are, it tells you that there's something serious that is wrong. And it gives you the energy to do something about it. Right? And those are really important things. Anger is a primary emotion, one of those 6 that I mentioned before: mad, sad, glad, scared, surprised, and disgusted. And each of those emotions says there is something incredibly important going on right now. The reason that we have emotions, why would we have emotions in our brain from a neurological perspective? The answer is that they are the markers of significance. Every time we have an emotion, it says this is very, very important. Pay attention to it with all your body and with all your heart. So we have to pay attention to those. And it does no good to say, well, you just shouldn't be angry. Or anger is, I've had people say anger is like an appendix. It's no longer necessary. And of course, that's nonsense. Anger is a wonderful, very powerful emotion. The problem with anger is it's so energetic. Once I had a situation where I was running a depression group, a group for people who were depressed on Tuesdays, and a group for angry people on Wednesdays. And the depression group, wonderful folks, nice people, no energy. It's like, what's your job as a therapist of the depression group? Get anything happening. Get them to talk. Get them to do something. Take a walk. Anything. Yeah, it's really hard not to be depressed at the end of a depression group, because they kind of pull you in, and through no fault of anybody's, but you're always pumping energy into it. Okay, anger management group. You know what she said? I can't stand that. No. You're always trying to pull it together, keep the thing from exploding on you, and it's wonderful fun if you don't lose control. If you lose control, it's all over. Especially with a teenage group. I once lost control of one of my teenage groups, and I just sat there and watched it. They just about destroyed the place. It was, and they were having fun doing it too. It's like, would you please stop? Please stop! Stop! Please stop! You learn lessons from your failures. Is all I can tell you on that. Okay, there are 4 approaches to change in any major area, including anger. Help the person change what they do, change how they think, change what they feel, and change their spirit. And of those 4 areas, anger management, there's a lot of very effective tools, especially in those first 3 areas, to help people change what they do. I'll give you an example of that pretty soon. And to change how they think, cognitive therapy, and what they feel, relaxation training. The weakest area in anger management is the spiritual one. Is the one that, if not spiritual, existential. What does the anger mean to the person in terms of their whole being? And that's difficult. The one area that's been developed is forgiveness, which I consider a existential and spiritual aspect of of anger work with the most angry people who have developed resentments over time. But there's a lot more in terms of, remember that angry spirit that I was talking about, the angry spirit quiz on a scale of 0 to 10. How many points would you go for life sucks and then you die? That's the existential approach. And I work with chronically angry adults, chronically angry teenagers. I hesitate to say chronically angry kids because it's just so early to give them that label. And I will tell you something about chronically angry people. They are some of the most miserably unhappy people in this universe. Yeah. If I offered to pay you $1 million, and the only catch was you had to wake up every morning angry, you had to be irritable, grumpy, and angry all through the day, and you had to go to bed mad, and have a few angry dreams. I'll throw an extra $500,000 for that. Yeah. Yeah. Would you accept it? No. Who would? Yeah. But there are people who are chronically angry. Here's my analogy. Imagine that life is like a bus. And normally you're the driver of the bus, or perhaps the creator is the driver of the bus, but he allows you to think you're the driver of the bus. And you and all your emotions are on the bus. What do you think would happen if anger stood up? One of those emotions stood up. Anger stood up and took over the bus, hijacked the bus of your life. Two things. One is he'd aim for every pothole in the road. Okay? So you're going to be in for a really bumpy ride. Yeah. And the second is, and even more important, he'd kick off all the other emotions from the bus. The only thing that would be left is anger. Because anger would then become the way you solve or your emotional reaction to anything and everything. Here, I'll illustrate that. Let me ask you to just take a notice here. Let me ask you, what is your emotional response to this event? Somebody knocking loudly on the door. Chances are, most of you say, what are you talking about? Emotional response. And most of you are just are at neutral. Yeah, we're not always emotionally activated. Emotions are special events. We have, as against moods. Moods are what we carry along on and we all have a mood that we're in for a general emotional climate, you might say. But a specific emotion is different. Okay, probably most of you didn't. Some of you might have had a specific emotional reaction. And if one particular emotion has captured you, then you almost certainly had an emotional response to that. Let's say that what your fear-based is called, and you hear that knock. What do they have to know? You immediately, your heart's pumping. You have a fear response. If you're shame-based and you hear that knock, it's they checked my credentials. They're going to kick me out. All right? I think there's a few people in this world, I call them joy-based. Yeah. Oh, good, there's somebody else. Come on in. Come on down. I'm happy. You're happy. It's like, how do you do that? Why don't they ever show up in therapy? That's what I want to know. You don't get joy-based people. They don't show up. If they do, though, actually, there are people called secure. And they show up because they have specific problems rather than general issues. Okay, but what if anger is taking over the bus of your life? You hear that? Boy, does that annoy me. Another interruption. I hate it when these people interrupt. Can't you do something about it? And and you just go on and on and on. And your anger just generates more anger inside you. We have a brain-body connection. And if our body starts acting angry, it tells the brain, find something to be angry about. Right? Anything, it doesn't matter. Right? And chronically angry people, I say, they've never met an anger invitation they didn't like. Right? An anger invitation is anything you could get angry about. Yeah. You've probably had a dozen today already. Right? You had to get here, find. When I got here, The doors weren't open. That's an anger invitation. I couldn't get this thing to work. That's an anger invitation. Everybody has anger invitations all the time. Most of us have learned you can't accept them all because they're very costly. But the chronically angry person, they say, sure, thank you. And not only that, they go looking for them. Right? Yeah, they go looking. My angry adolescents, the kid, the guy on the angry spirit quiz with the 9, he goes looking for things to get angry about every day, or he did. And he'd always, by the time he got into my office, he'd always have something that he had found that how could they do this to me kind of stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is give you a few tools that you can use to help people who are excessively angry. And I should add, people who act out their anger. There's another issue which is, I think, very underserved service and misunderstood or not understood enough, and that's anger turned inward. But we're really not going to talk about anger. We don't have time to talk about anger turned inward today. We're going to focus on people whose anger goes out toward other people. As you can imagine, connecting to sexual abuse and shame issues, that a lot of people with shame and because of sexual abuse have anger, a lot of anger, but it's turned inward. Or you can have anger in, you can have anger out, or you can have both. It's not either or. Some people have both. And it's the total amount of anger that predicts early death, by the way. Whether it's anger in or anger out doesn't matter. Too much anger kills you. Okay, on page 16 is a timeout, and I call it the 4 R's. Recognize, retreat, relax, and return. Recognize. What do you have to recognize? That you're starting to lose control. A timeout is the first behavioral thing I teach most of my adolescents who've gotten in trouble because they let themselves flail away. They let themselves get angry and they couldn't stop themselves. So you have to but this is a voluntary timeout. This is not a timeout where somebody's telling you what to do. So you recognize that you're losing control. In order to recognize it, you have to know a lot about yourself. You have to know what are the signs that I'm starting to lose control. Is my voice starting to rise high? Am I talking fast? Am I pacing? Am I making fists, pounding? Am I saying certain things that whenever I say them, within a couple minutes, I'm screaming and yelling? So my first goal with my clients is help them learn what the signs that they themselves are about to explode, to have a meltdown, if you want to use that term. Retreat is the next step, to go to a safe place. And we talk about where that can be and how it can be, and how they're going to get there. I had one woman, she jumped in her car. She was so mad. She said, I need to take a time out. She jumped in her car, tried backing out at 50 miles an hour, and totaled her car into a tree before she got out of the driveway. So I said, that's not a good time out. She said, yes, I think you're right. I can't afford that many cars and that many trees. See, you take a bad time out, they come after you. Okay. And then the third step is relax. And the true measure of relaxation is that the anger has to drain out of your body. So I will ask people, what can you do in order to get rid of your anger? And I just say, don't go to a bar, don't go drinking, don't do pornography or something like that. But what can you do that's relatively healthy that will help you relax? And some people can just read or have a cup of decaffeinated coffee or something of that sort. Some people, especially teenagers, do need some sort of physical outlet. And this is difficult because there's a lot of research that says simply ventilating your anger only makes it worse. Screaming and yelling and shouting just makes you want to scream and yell and shout. That does not help. But some kids will say, I've got to do something physical. And so what we try to do then, and what I try to do with them, is to develop a routine, an exercise routine that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So they know at the beginning I'm going to be really angry, and then there will be a middle phase, and at the end I will have released my anger. So what doesn't work is just like one kid, I'll call him a kid. He was a freshman in college. He was 19 years old, And he went down, and there was a punching bag down in the basement of his dormitory, and he imagined the face of the person he hated. And then he whapped it, and whapped it, and whapped it, which sounds okay, except I asked him, well, at the end of that, what are you feeling? He said, I'm ready to kill the guy. No, that's not that didn't work in that situation. But I had another guy just the other week. He has a punching bag, and he whapped away on it, but it was different. Because he's done it before, and he knew 10 minutes of this is all I need, and I will be done with it. And he didn't imagine the face; he was just getting a physical outlet. And then the last thing, and just as crucial an R as the other three, is to return. As again, there's another possible fourth R, which is called running away. I don't want to talk. I'm not angry anymore. I don't want to talk about it. But if you're really going to have a good time out, you have to return and be willing to deal with the issue. Now, sometimes we often in the literature it looks like there's one angry kid in the family, everybody else is calm and cool and reasonable. But often angry kids live in angry families. And so when that kid comes back, it doesn't mean that mom and dad are ready for a rational conversation. They may still be really mad at the kid. But I say, if you can, talk about it then or the next day and try to come to some resolution, then we may not have to do this again. So a good time out, the 4 R's: recognize, retreat, relax, and return. Next comes what is most common, and that is cognitive therapy. I would say that 90% of anger management groups primarily do cognitive therapy. And that's on page 17. And it's a pretty simple idea, although simple ideas sometimes are not so easy to implement. But the idea is that it's not what's actually happening out there that makes us mad. It's how we think about what's happening out there that makes us mad. So if we could just change how we think about what's happening out there, we won't get mad. And as you can see here, the two things I focus on, one is choices. And the idea there is to help the child or the adolescent look at what choices are meaningful to them. And I want to give you an example here of how this is delicate and can go very wrong or right. I had a little boy. He's just a beautiful young. Well, he's 8. He was 8 years old at the time, and very energetic and playful. The kind of kid you just want to pick him up and give him a hug instantly. He's a very good child actor, by the way. He'll be good. He has a future. He also has about 6 diagnoses. Every psychiatrist he's seen give him a different diagnosis. So, we go from nowadays bipolar is popular. So, everybody used to be ADD, now is bipolar. And I don't know if that's a helpful change or not helpful change. A different change in medication is what it amounts to. And he had lost it and had a meltdown at school and bopped somebody, screamed at the teacher, and got suspended. And he must have been 9 or 10. He couldn't have been that young. And he and his mother show up in my office, and his mother is a very good, wonderful person. And who I happen to have done a lot of therapy with as well. And I know she's a very good mother. And this kid is a difficult kid. But she starts to give him the lecture. Right? And the lecture, whether it's done in or I'm just really care about you, is still the same. And it goes like this. You're a wonderful kid. You're so intelligent. You know that you have choices and you're making bad choices. And I really don't understand, and I just wish you would make good choices, honey. And he broke into tears. And he turned to me and he said, will you please tell my mom that I know about these choices and I cannot make them. He said, when I started to lose it, I could see myself losing it. I could feel myself losing it. I told myself to stop it, and I could not. And if you know anything about, like, read a book like Green's book, The Explosive Child, for instance, or the Papalos's book, The Bipolar Child, you know that they have meltdowns. And they have meltdowns, and they only have a few seconds. Often the kid only has a few seconds, and there's a fork in the road, and he could not take the fork of less violence. Yeah. And so when I say what's important is the choices that the kid has. What I mean is the choices that he or she thinks that they have at that moment. And so all I could do with that child after he got done crying, and I helped his mother understand what he was saying, and that was helpful in terms of the shame stuff, because he was feeling really shameful that he couldn't stop this. And then what we went from there is, well, what can you change? You can't change everything, but what choices can you make? And he came up with what seemed like a small choice, like I could avoid Billy in the playground, something like that. But it was a choice he could make, and then that led toward pride. And when he was able to do it, it was a movement toward some sort of success. So focusing on choices, but being realistic. And then the hot thoughts, cool thoughts is a very simple idea also, which is kids in particular tend to have hot thoughts, and they're simple. And they often have curse words. They can be, I'm not going to repeat them here, but they're something, it's just not fair is a hot thought, for instance. And there's other kinds of hot thoughts. And the idea is to recognize your hot thought, realize that that's a sign that you're losing control as soon as you think about it. And then what is useless is to say, stop the hot thought, because you can't. You can only do one thing, and that is to substitute a cool thought for a hot thought. With anger management, with anything, you can't just stop bad behavior. You have to start good behavior. You can't just stop a bad thought. You have to replace it with a good thought. So that's the key for the cognitive work. Now, I see I've got about 10 minutes to go, so I want to go on to page 19. I already gave the analogy of the bus. Who's driving the bus of your life? Is it you or is it your anger? If it is anger, then there's a matter of relaxation and getting back in the driver's seat. What's the goal? The goal is not to kick anger off the bus of your life. The goal is to get yourself back in the driver's seat and invite all the other emotions back on the bus. And there's really two things that you can do in terms of the affective treatment. This is the third area of change. The first area of change is change what you do. The second area is change how you think. The third area is literally change what you feel. And there's two ways to do that. One is, if you look at the bottom of page 19, is to help a person look at what happens to their body when they are angry, and how can we change that? And the single most effective counter is relaxation treatment, relaxation therapy, if you want to call it that. And there's if I can remember a book, it's by a guy named Smith. That's helpful. It's Jerome Smith is his name. And it's called ABC Relaxation Therapy. And it teaches several different ways to help people relax. Relaxation is not an easy thing to teach, and it's certainly not an easy thing for angry people to do. I don't do a relaxation tape for my clients until I know them well enough so I can individualize it. I want to have the metaphors that they... like, I'll give you an example here. When I was first learning how to do this, I had this beautiful metaphor of relaxation. You're sitting on a beach, you're lying on a beach, and you hear the waves of the ocean gently flowing, and you're relaxing and relaxing and relaxing. And I did it, and the woman opens her eyes when I'm done. She says, "I'm afraid of water." It's like, okay, all right. So you have to have individual metaphors that work for the person. Okay. But where relaxation is particularly useful is when a person has a combination of both anxiety and anger. When they're both scared and angry, you hear, fight or flight. A lot of times I think it's fight and flight. That people are going back and forth between fear and anger. They don't know whether to flee or to fight, and they end up doing both. And relaxation training is really useful for people to have less anxiety so that they can have less anger. And then you can do the cognitive work on anxiety as well as anger. The other thing you do is invite the other emotions back on the bus. And I'll give you an example of that. I was working with a, probably 15-year-old girl. And this girl, her mother had an affair, and that broke up the family. And she was allied with dad, but the court said she had to live with mom. Okay? So she kept running away. And she'd run away and get placed in foster home, and then they try again, and this is not the same as the other girl. But she ran away and came back and got into trouble and stuff. And she had gone to therapy. She'd probably been in therapy for 5 years by the time she saw me. And you know what she said? The first thing she said when she walked in the room, she said, "Ron, I will talk with you about anything you want as long as you don't make me try to quit hating my mother." Okay? And she meant it. And all she wanted to do was to vilify her mother. Her mother was evil, evil, evil. And after I got to know her, this was by no means at the beginning, I took an exercise where I took sheets of paper, regular 8 by 11 sheets of paper, and I put one word on each of them: sad, lonely, scared, ashamed, guilty. And I put them under a blanket. I had a blanket or a sheet. And I put them under a blanket, and on top of it I put one word: angry. And I invited her to peek under the blanket to look at what other emotions there might be, which got her a little curious as to what other emotions she might have. And she kind of looked at me like, is this a trick or not? But she pulled one out, just a little. I said, you can push it right back if you want to. And she pulled it out, and it was lonely, of all things. And she said, I am not lonely. You're trying to make me say I'm lonely, I miss my mother. I don't miss my mother. But I do miss my dog. And that was the start of therapy. I miss my dog. And that helped her eventually. Then she looked at another emotion and another emotion and another emotion, and we were getting the other emotions back on the bus. Because as long as she only had hate, there's no way. You can't do hate. You can't heal hate without compassion. And you can't have compassion if you only have anger. So she needed all of those. And that brings us to the last one. If you go to page 20, this is the existential part. And as I said, this is often neglected in anger management. I think coming here and talking in part to a religious community, this is even more relevant here, but I'm not saying it's not relevant everywhere, because it is. You have to get at the spiritual malaise that underlies the chronically angry person, whatever age that is. I've had that 15-year-old who scored 9 points on that one item. In terms of the hostile anger or the angry spirit quiz, had the second highest score I've ever had on a person. The highest was a 72-year-old guy whose life finally fell apart because he couldn't play golf anymore. Yeah. He could handle his wife divorcing him. He could handle nobody. His son's not talking to him. But when his golf game went, that was the end of his spirit. All right, so. On page 20 is this hostile worldview. Most people are bad and untrustworthy. Nothing good happens. Hope is painful. All of that represents the background for somebody who's in despair. Because the most angry kids and the most angry adults are in despair. Life is bad and it will never get better. Where does anger come in? Anger pushes people away. Imagine I'm one of those goody two-shoes social workers And you're angry and bitter. Bitter is another word that really fits here. And I'm coming in here, and like a cartoon character, I have this balloon that says, it's okay. And life will be good. You don't have to be angry. Tomorrow, there's always tomorrow. Tomorrow's another day. And you've got this pin. And your job is to puncture the balloon of my idealism. Because my idealism doesn't fit in your world. So anger, it pushes people away, and it pushes hope away, but then you're left with more despair. And anger defends against despair, but paradoxically ironically leads to more. And what does a person use? Cynicism, sarcasm, and criticism. Now, I have never had somebody sent to an anger management group because of chronic cynicism or sarcasm, but they should be. They should be sent all the time. And if there are some of you here, I haven't made any personal statements yet, but if there are some of you here who have that chronic hostility and sarcasm, it would behoove you to take a really good look at that because it could kill you. Okay, the result of all that is meanness of spirit. And how do you treat that? If you go one last page, and then we're gonna break for questions. Oh, and notice in that little box, anger at God fits in here at the existential area. And something I call impotent rage. Impotent rage is when you're shaking your fist at the universe because you're so angry about something that you can't control. That your spouse has just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. You just got a wonderful job report, a beautiful job review right before the layoff. There are things that we cannot control in life, and they lead to this despair. So, was there ever a time in your life when you weren't so angry? I just have questions I like to ask people about this. What were you like, and what were your values and goals? How has anger affected your spirit, your being? Whom have you held responsible? Whom have you blamed for your anger? Who would you be if you weren't so angry? It's amazing how many kids I have asked that question to. Who would you be if you weren't so angry? And their answer was, I don't know. Because they really don't. They've been angry for so long that they can't imagine who they would be. And where it's helpful is to say, well, here's what I've seen about you, and here's what I think you would be. But you have to always ground that in concrete evidence and details. How would letting go of your anger affect your being, your belonging, your connection with others, your work, and I don't just mean your job, but everything you do, and your spiritual self? And most importantly, number 13, and this I think is a good place to end, how much do you yearn for a life free from bitterness, anger, hate, and to connect with what we've been talking about the rest of the day, shame? What would your life be like? How much do you yearn for a life free from bitterness, anger, hate, and shame? Okay, so I think now we would want to open this up for questions, I believe.
Before we go to for questions, many of you have approached myself and my colleagues and other members of the organization to say thank you. And what we thought would be most appropriate, we'll have one person who can get it on the microphone, and he will fulfill the obligation for all. We want to, Avram Baruch Edelman is a principal for general studies in the Lakewood area, and has come here he's also a social worker, a certified social worker, and just wants to express on behalf of some of you some thoughts. So I'm going to call Rabbi Edelman forward.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody, the organizers, participate for this wonderful educating seminar. The two thoughts I would like to share, which as therapists or people that are working with people, we believe that people do have the ability to change. And as Dr. Shulman gave a very realistic and perhaps morbid outlook of what's going on. The 2 points that I would like to suggest that I would like to do, and I need your help, and I learned this from others doing the same, is A, that many therapists that I've spoken to say there's a desperate need for more. And sitting at the tables over here at other mental health conferences, they're saying, we don't have enough therapists. It's difficult work, it's tedious work, but listening to the doctor giving us the information, which is sad, we need to perhaps be an example to the victims by us going into the deep waters and being willing to take the risks and work hard and take the extensive training to do that work. Second, but perhaps even more important, is to network. If people that are in charge or run community centers, if they could be whatever culture, religion, or ethnicity, if they realize that if being popular is so important, perhaps we can network. We could go in as groups into whatever it is and say, we mental health professionals, if it's a rabbi or whatever it is, and say, we are very concerned this is going on. We know that it came to your attention. Please advise us. We expect from you to do certain decisions, which perhaps we will not be able just to do prevention for the toddlers and the children, as Dr. Shulman said, but perhaps do prevention even for the older adults, which are at large. Other than that, it's been a very positive experience, and thank you very much.
Could we have a second mic? Does it work? Hello? Yeah, okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Raise your hand. We'll be more than happy to give you the mic. Well, now that we decided it's a mic, we just scared you not to ask any questions.
Hi. You talked about outward anger.
Yes.
What about inward anger, like passive aggressiveness, or holding grudges, or like smiling, like the Jekyll Hyde personality?
Yes, they're
like smiling and then.
The question is about anger turned inward, and you're right. There are varieties of anger turned inward. One thing you're talking about is passive aggression, which I call sneaky anger in some ways, and that is an interesting variety, because with passive aggression, the person who is passive aggressive has discovered one very small, very important truth in life, which is you can really frustrate powerful people by doing nothing at all, right? And what the passive aggressive person is doing is to say, you have more power over me, you have control over me, and I won't let you, I won't give in to you. So the passive aggressive person, they don't say no, they don't say yes, they say nothing at all, right? And the result is that people are just totally frustrated with them. It's quite a good, effective technique, and adolescents are some of the best at passive aggression. How you challenge that is to try to get the person to actually say what they want, and then reward them for saying what they want or what they don't want, rather than just hinting at it or fudging around. Now, in terms of anger turned inward, there's a lot more than just passive aggression. The core of understanding anger turned inward is that often the safest and easiest target of a person's anger is yourself, because maybe because other people would hit you if you got angry at them, maybe because of the combination of shame and anger, you believe that you are the right target. And when you have anger turned inward, it can lead at a minimal level. It leads to self-neglect, just not taking care of yourself, not making that doctor's appointment because I'm not worth it, and self-blame, calling yourself names is another way that anger turned inward plays out. And then at a more extreme level is self-abuse, literally hitting or cutting or pounding your head against the wall. And ultimately the final anger turned inward is suicide. So what I try to do is to help people realize that their anger is what's important, not whether it's turning out or turning in, but how much anger they have. With people who do turn their anger in a lot, the therapy is to help them learn to express to other people that they are angry. And if they're turning their anger in on themselves with shame, because of shame, then you have to do self-esteem therapy. Okay. Yes, back there?
Good.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Microphone's over here.
In your experience, do you find that, like this boy you described who was ready to, he had that 2 seconds to make a change?
Yes.
Do you find that a lot of these people need medication? That you could treat them without the medication?
Well, let me speak to medication for anger briefly. Frankly, some people need medication. Their brains just are not working, and they're not going to get working. And I tell a person, if you've worked really hard with me, and I've worked as hard as I can with you, and I'm pretty good at what I do, and I can see you're really working hard at it, and we're not getting anywhere, then we better face our limits and get some help. And there are 3 areas of the brain that are associated with strong anger. The first area is underactivity in the prefrontal lobes. And there's just not enough juice there. There's just not enough blood flowing into the prefrontal lobes, so that people tend to be very impulsive and not very good at making judgments. So their anger is out of frustration. And the medication for that are the psychostimulants, because many of those people have attention deficit disorder, or it's similar to attention deficit disorder. So psychostimulants are used for some people. A second part of the brain that is associated with chronic anger problems is right up here. It's called the Anterior Cingulate Gyrus. And it lies above the corpus callosum in the brain. And people who have too much energy in the Anterior Cingulate Gyrus obsess. They can't let go of something. Like with road rage, for instance. If somebody goes by me and I get mad at them and they get mad at me, and that person makes an obscene gesture, and then we're both done with it, that's just road anger. Road rage is the guy I worked with who had an incident like that and chased the guy for 17 miles. Yeah, that's road rage. And he probably has an anterior cingulate gyrus problem, and the medication for that is antidepressants seem to work for that, SSRIs. The third area, and the most ominous of all in terms of, and the one that most predicts not just anger but rage, are the temporal lobes, especially the left, for some reason, the left temporal lobe. If that is working poorly, by which sometimes it can be too much energy and sometimes too little energy, then the person not only has poor impulse control, but they can fly into a rage almost instantly. And the medication for that is like a seizure. So the medication is actually anti-seizure medication like Depakote. So any of those 3 medications can be helpful. Antipsychotics are used. Anti-anxiety agents are used. There is no anger-specific medication, at least not in the market right now. So you have to know enough about the person to try to get them to a doctor who will listen to you, if you're lucky enough to have a psychiatrist, for instance, who will listen to what you say. Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, I work in a high school, and as long as the kids have the option to come in on their own, they're very willing clients. But working outside of, working in an agency where it's not voluntary, and you're generally getting a very resistant, unhappy teenager.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't necessarily specific to what you said, but in
right.
general, how do you break down the resistance?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Yeah. I'm glad you asked it. I'm leaving now. Because it's not an easy answer. Well, there isn't actually a central answer to that. Angry people are very low in empathy. So the angrier you are, the less empathic they are. I had a teenager once, I said, put yourself in your mother's shoes. And she said, I don't want to, and they don't fit. And she knew exactly what I was talking about. So you can't get at the angry adolescent, I should add, adolescents as a whole are poor in empathy because it's a time where they're very self-focused. So you can't get at the angry adolescent through empathy and through moral request for them to put themselves in the other person's shoes. There's only one way you can get it, and that is self-interest. You have to help them look at how their anger and aggression is screwing up their lives. And in the area of health, in the area of money, in the area of school performance, friendships, lost friendships. This guy I told you about, for instance, who the guy who scored 9 points on the angry spirit, the first item in the angry spirit quiz, his parents wanted him to come for counseling for quite a while. And he refused. But the reason he came, the very first session, he said, a girl came and talked to me, and she said, you know, Mike, I'll call him, you know, Mike, I used to like you before you became a jerk. And that was self-interest. He said, I want to start dating, and I want to start having some relationships with girls, and they don't like me. So I tried to focus on hey, it's your life. If you want to, I told one guy, teenager, I said, you know, your life, what do you predict it's going to be? And he said, it looks to me like I'm going to be a criminal. I'm going to get caught. I'm going to get in jail on and off. This kid, by the way, has 140 IQ. And I said, okay, so you're predicting that you're going to have a career as a small-time loser. He said, yeah. And I said, do you want that? And he says, okay by me. Next week he came in and he says, not okay by me. I don't want to. So in terms of motivating the unmotivated kid, it's go to their self-interest. Find out what makes a difference to them, not to you. Okay, I think there was a question over here.
We'll let you wrap it up.
Oh, I'm wrapping it up.
Yes.
All right. Goodbye. If you do have any questions or comments coming up here, I'll be glad to talk to you.
Once again, thanks for joining. Please be in touch. You do have our email address. The person to be in touch with in our office is Dina. Once again, if you can, it's June 5th, a 3-hour seminar for Design for Moms.